somewhere in a good location and wait for them. But with turkey, you get the calling, and not only from you, but the bird calling back at you. So it's that back and forth, a whole lot of interaction with the animal. It's a heck of a lot of fun, and you're definitely going to annoy the people you live with.
Yeah.
And if you live close enough to your neighbors, maybe your neighbors too, because turkey calls are pretty loud. So definite warning if you got pets
Oh,
around.
your pets are gonna love it. Yeah.
Yeah, they might get a little noisy today, but it's okay. We're gonna have a good
Yeah,
time.
we're gonna have a good evening, and so just kind of some overall, housekeeping things. Again, we appreciate you got your guys' patience. We were having some issues with Zoom. I know we're getting a few more people to trickle in here. Your webcams and mics are disabled for this webinar. Obviously, we hope you guys kind of practice along with your calls, and that just kind of keeps the flow and keeps everybody engaged without having too much background noise. There will be a recording of this webinar that will be distributed to everybody who registered. So if you need to take off early, feel free to do so, and you will get a copy of this webinar. It'll probably take a day or two before we get it uploaded and sent out to you, but you should have it. So without that, I don't have too much else before we dive right into talking turkey. So a couple things we're really going to focus on today is if you've been a part of our Turkey 101 and Turkey 102 webinars, we focused a lot on kind of the regulatory as well as some of the ecology and some of the strategies. But now we're really going to dive into, I would argue, is probably the most important aspect of turkey hunting, and that's calling. And so we'll touch on some of the common vocalizations again, just as kind of a quick refresher, but then we're going to break right into going over the various calls. We have several different versions and models here, and we'll just kind of go through, how we make vocalizations, but more importantly, what vocalizations we're using when. I think that's when I first started turkey hunting, that's one thing I really struggled with, was knowing when to use this vocalization versus a different one. And so we'll dive quite a bit into that. But
Yeah, and the nice thing about calling, this is one aspect of hunting that you can practice at any time. So you're driving to work, you got to commute to work, you could be practicing your turkey calls. Slip in a duck call every once in a while in there if you're feeling squirrely, but you can practice those at a lot of times. Maybe you're walking through Sam's or Costco and you're just chirping along. People will look at you funny, but get
just
your
a little
practice
bit.
where you
Yeah.
wherever you can get it, and that's something that you just can't do with. I mean, you can't scout when you're driving around. You can't practice firing your bow or anything like that, but you can practice calling. So sorry, but there's no excuses to not be at least
Nope.
somewhat decent.
I agree. And especially, some of the calls we'll talk about today, like the diaphragm, you can see how small this is. You can virtually carry that just about anywhere. And
Hands free.
yep, gives you good practice
Hands
time.
free calling. That's a safety tip when you're driving. Make sure you're using your hands free calls.
So we just wanted to kind of quickly show this video. It's got some really cool turkey behavior, but also a lot of the vocalizations that you're going to be hearing us, recreate and discuss a little bit. So we just kind of wanted to set the stage with this nice little video that just shows some generic turkey sounds. Get you fired up. Really cool critters.
I can feel the ticks crawling on me right now.
Yeah. So like we said, we'll start off with a very quick and kind of dirty overview of different common vocalizations, just so we know we're all on the same page as we kind of move through this presentation. Arguably, in my opinion, the most important vocalization, not one that many hunters make when we're out hunting, but something that we're all listening for, is that gobble. It's kind of this loud, rapid gurgling sound, and we've got a little playthrough. So quick headphone warning, it might be a little loud, just kind of giving you a word of caution, but this is what your typical gobble sounds like. And it can be that consistent. It really can. You can hear several different toms gobbling at once, all reacting to the same hen vocalizations, and that's fairly common when you're out there. But the neat thing, in my opinion, about the gobble call is its ability to travel distance. It really does carry that sound quite a bit away. And we should mention kind of up front that we are, as turkey hunters, are essentially trying to reverse some natural processes in nature. The whole point of a turkey's gobble call is to basically infatuate that he is the dominant male in that area, and he's hoping the hens come to him. Where in turkey hunting, we're trying to kind of reverse that process a little bit, and we're trying to convince that tom to come to hens, which is a little bit difficult, but I think that is an important concept to kind of pay attention to as we move through this presentation, that a lot of what we are doing is arguably trying to reverse some natural processes that kind of already occur. Now, the next and arguably the most commonly used vocalizations, I know this is the one I probably use most often, mixed with maybe a purr. This is kind of the basic yelp sequence. And when we play this vocalization, don't necessarily listen to the tonality or the volume of the notes, but more so this very rhythmic cadence. So just kind of pay attention to that. And you can hear how it's this very consistent pace, this very consistent cadence. And that's, in my opinion, arguably the important aspect of a turkey yelp. Every turkey sounds a little bit different. I know some sound raspy, some sound very high pitched, but just matching that cadence is very important.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Every single turkey sounds different. So it doesn't matter if your yelp sounds a little bit different than our yelp, sounds a little bit different than Rob Keck's yelp, or whoever you've listened give a calling demonstration on YouTube or wherever you've watched it. The important thing is getting that cadence down and sounding like a turkey, and get your feedback from the best judges and the only judge that really matters, which is the birds that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
If you're out there and calling and you're getting birds excited and you get a bird, then it doesn't matter what people think it sounds like. It's obviously working. So cadence, I think, is a big thing with a lot of calls. And we've all heard animals that sound funny. I know I've been in the marsh and you hear a call and you're like, oh, who gave that guy a goose call? And then you look up and it's a bird flying over. So yeah, don't be too worried about perfection. Just get close and you'll have fun out there.
The good old turkey yelp. Now, this is one I use quite a bit. I don't necessarily use it as a singular vocalization. I pair it a lot with a purr. I don't know about yourself, but I quite often will cluck with a purr. But this is a vocalization that's really just kind of getting the attention of another turkey. It's like, hey, I'm here. Pretty basic, but here's a kind of a nice little vocalization so you can hear what that cluck sounds like. And you can even hear in that recording, there's a little bit of purr action going on with that cluck if you've got a spy level ear. But one thing I like to use the kind of cluck as well as the purr. Again, it's not a vocalization I'm going to use to try to initiate contact with that bird, but it's really good at just, you've already got him convinced to come in and you're just kind of keeping him engaged. You're just kind of continuing to paint this picture that it's a very realistic scenario and that your decoys are actually birds. And turkeys, they aren't quiet. They are very consistent, just always making some kind of sound, whether it's clucks, purrs, cuts, yelps. They're very, very vocal. So if you have a bunch of decoys out and you just go dead silent, sometimes that can cause that tom to, something doesn't look quite right. So clucks can act really good at just continuing that reassurance as he's already approaching. But again, it's not something I use to try to reach out and initiate that contact. Up next is the Kiki. And if you don't know what the Kiki sounds like, chances are you would probably not assume this is a turkey. Pretty cool sound, very, very high pitched. It's often made by immature turkeys, not necessarily, adults, but what it really means is essentially I'm lost. And so it can be very advantageous to use in the fall. I personally don't use it in the spring. Do you ever?
No, I've never really heard them do it in the spring.
Yeah. So again, in the fall, and this is where it gets important to understand the seasonal behavior of the game that you're targeting. So turkeys in the fall and winter, they will shift their habitat range as well as their behaviors to a more flock style behavior. So you're going to see big flocks in the fall, and you may have a flock of 50 to 100 hens. And one strategy that a lot of hunters use in the fall is to go in and break up that flock and cause that flock to disperse. And you can start to use this Kiki call and you may start to get some of those older hens who are coming back to try to, rescue the young. They'll start getting a little interested, and they may start coming into that call. So it can be quite effective in the fall, but not necessarily something I use in the spring. But I know quite a few predator hunters use that vocalization quite a bit, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, definitely it's high pitched, and so it sounds like a young turkey, which sounds pretty
Delicious. Yeah.
tasty. Yeah, to not only us as people, but coyotes and foxes too, I'm sure.
And up next is the purr.
Well, that's what you might hear if you were to call a turkey 1-900 number. That's love language for a turkey right
Love
there. That gets
language.
them really excited, and let's face it, it's breeding time for turkeys. That's why it's exciting time, and it's hormones that's making the gobbler out there gobble and strut and all those things. So sometimes you gotta whisper sweet nothings
Hmm.
into their ear, and a purr is a good way to do that. And I love that it's not loud enough that if you don't know where he's at, you can do the purr and not be afraid to spook him.
Sure, sure. Yeah, this is again kind of like I mentioned with the cluck vocalization. This is again something I use as I already have identified that tom and he's already approaching or somewhat interested or engaged in my setup. That's when I use a lot of clucks and a lot of purrs, just like you said, speaking that love language. And we've got a short video here that actually shows how frequent turkeys are purring. And just I'll kind of be quiet. You may need to turn your volume up, but just watch as all these hens and a few toms walk right by the camera, and you can just hear constant purring over and over.
Okay, the quiet purrs in
Hmm.
there.
Very subtle, very soft.
But look how you'd have to be real careful and be still. That hen came out first. So if you had him in position, it'd be tough to get in position without anybody seeing
They
you.
would. That's a lot of eyes watching you.
Yeah, that's where decoys are real nice because they get the eyes off of you and onto something else.
But another thing I really like about the purr, again, kind of like you mentioned, if you lose track of where that tom is, and maybe he's already snuck up behind you, he's already 10. If you start doing a big yelp sequence, you're out there just, you know, cutting away as loud as you can, he's going to freak out and probably leave.
Mhm.
But that soft little purr, even if he's somewhere behind you and you're just trying to figure out, is he to the right, is he to the left, sometimes just like we saw in that video, little purrs can even convince a tom to gobble back at that vocalization. So if you happen to, I use it quite a bit for this. If I happen to lose eyesight of that bird, or especially if a bird is swinging wide on you, turkeys have very good eyesight, and so you don't want to just quickly jerk and turn your head too quick, or even I personally don't even try to turn and watch them. But using little purrs can still convince him to gobble ever so often, so you get a pretty good idea of where he's at, in terms of your position.
Probably a better than 90% chance that the first couple of turkeys that you don't get, it's because they saw you. Maybe you'll know and maybe you won't, but you'd be surprised. You cannot get away with the movement that you
Anything.
do with deer. I know when I was a kid, just little movements like moving my gun from here to here, and they were gone, didn't get a shot. So they remarkably good at picking up that movement, even more so than deer, and deer are not bad.
Sure. And the nice thing about a purr is we'll get to when we, do some calling demonstrations and how to produce that sound. It doesn't take a lot of movement, whether you're using a diaphragm call, which already in and of itself is hands free, or a slate or a pot call. It takes very little movement. So again, when those birds are in close, it makes for a nice vocalization to use. I'll let Curtis tell you a little about the cut.
The cut, yeah. So just think about a staccato yelp. So if you kind of think of a yelp as hello, think of a cut as like hey, So it's more attention grabbing, and to parallel it to duck calling, which I often do because I also really enjoy that. This is almost like the comeback call. So it's good. It's great to mix in there with your yelp sequence just to mix it up, sound like variations of different birds
Hmm.
calling, and not to do the same thing all the time. So Yeah, do we have an example
We
of
do.
a cut here? Let's take a listen.
It is a almost similar sounding vocalization to the cluck, but it has a lot more emphasis in it, and it's a lot. If you think about that cadence again, kind of like we mentioned with the yelps, that cadence is a lot faster between cuts than it is between clucks. Because I know when I first started, the difference between a cluck, a cut, and a putt were kind of hard to differentiate, especially when you're trying to recreate the vocalization. But a lot of it is just how loud, how fast, and how kind of erratic or how quickly spaced those individual notes are.
Wow, can you say those 3 times fast? Cut, a putt, and I'm
Cut,
not even
cluck,
gonna
putt,
try.
cut, cluck.
Ooh,
That's about all I
I'm
can
gonna
get.
get in trouble saying that. But and you know, you don't have to necessarily know what all these different things
No.
are called.
Right.
We're just giving you examples, and mixing them up in a calling sequence helps you to sound like a live wild bird out there, which is variable. So good to add to your calling repertoire.
And up next is the putt. Here's some yelps in the background. So it's just this very little, again, similar to a cut, but not as loud. But this, in and of itself, usually means danger. It's not a call or a vocalization that I use a lot, but when I use it, I don't know that there's another vocalization that does what a putt can do.
Yeah, it's like that picture shows you right down there. It's to get them to go from strutting to get that neck and head stretched out so that you can take a shot and hopefully get the majority, if not all, of your pellets into that head and neck and leave the meat undisturbed so you can have that picture perfect Thanksgiving dinner turkey to put out on your dinner table.
Because just, you know, if you look at just this Tom who's over here in full strut, looks absolutely stunning, gorgeous. It is hard to tell where his exact neck is, especially where the meat is. Especially if you're using archer equipment, that would be a very difficult shot because it's very difficult to judge where on his body those internal organs are when he's all puffed up. It makes him seem a lot bigger than he is. And a lot of archery shooters, if they're shooting at full strut birds, will shoot kind of right over the back. They'll go right through the chunk of feathers there, give it a nice little haircut, and end up missing the bird. So I like to use this putt as a very, like Curtis said, last resort, get that thing to stick its neck out. But when you go to putt, you better already have that shotgun in place and ready because it will be quick.
Yeah, a lot of people just a double putt, and then that head goes up, and then if you're not shooting, then it's too late.
Yep. Well said. But like we said, not a call you use a lot, but when you use it, there's not a better sound to produce. Now, this is one I don't do a ton of in my calling. I'll use it occasionally if I'm, have a productive roost location that I think I actually, have a chance at a roost. But this is essentially just a sequence of vocalizations that birds make when they leave the roost. And so this is called the fly down cackle. Now, they will make the same vocalization when they fly up to the roost in the evening. But in Illinois, we're only hunting till 1 p.m. In most areas. So just kind of think of it as a fly down cackle. But here's a pretty good vocalization of that. And again, kind of like we mentioned with the yelp sequence, listen to the cadence of this cackle. It's not as finely spaced. It's very irregular. It's very erratic, more so than the yelp, but pay attention to that a little bit. And you'll also hear some wing beats as the bird's flying down. And so there, it sounded like in that recording, we had a couple different hens leave the roost and do a nice fly down cackle. Now, there is a huge word of caution with this, and this is something that I've seen pick up steam in the past few years, especially as more people are getting closer and closer to the roost, which, again, I don't necessarily see the value in that. I think getting back a little bit off the roost is advantageous, but a lot of people like to fly down cackle when that tom's on the roost. In a lot of cases, that's just going to keep that gobbler up there. Again, we're trying to reverse nature as hunters. His job as a normal tom is he's going to sit up there, gobble, and try to convince hens to come to him. So if he already hears those hens hit the ground from a different location than he's expecting, he'll just sit up there and gobble. and try to convince them to come over, in which case then he will fly down. So I personally don't do any fly down cackles until I hear or see that tom leave the roost. You may have a little different take on that, but
No, it's one. I think it's more important to know what it sounds like than to know how to do it,
Mhm.
because that's going to be when you're sitting there, that's your trigger that switches from the birds being in the tree to being on the ground. So important to know. I don't think it's important to make it. I mean, sure, I practice it, but just sitting here trying to think, I don't know if I've hardly ever used it
I've used it like a handful of times
in the field.
yeah.
Um,
And when people do make the vocalization, you'll see a lot of people will take their hat off and smack it on the ground and try to recreate that wing beat sound that you kind of hear. Because turkeys are big, stupid, not very good flyers. And so when they're flying off the roost, they sound like a 747 coming through the woods.
they fly a lot better than you.
That they do. But we got a nice little video of a fly down cackle sequence, so you can kind of see what the whole thing looks like and sounds like.
And notice how quietly they call when they're in the tree. You're going to want to match that. I like to cover my mouth. It's almost like the fly down cackle is how the turkey psychs themselves up to take on the day. You know, it's like, oh, I'm so comfy up here in my roost. Like, oh, I guess I'll go do turkey stuff, you know.
Now, I would, excuse me, I would like to give a shout out to this YouTube channel, Claycomb Outdoors. I just stumbled across them a few days ago, but they have a lot of really good footage of just turkeys doing what they do. And I think as a hunter, that should be, one of your first steps is learning every single thing you can about that specific animal that you're targeting. It will help you plan better. It'll help you call, but just everything. So really good resource. I recommend checking them out. Just a bunch of really good videos that are, 2 to 3 minutes showing some interesting turkey behavior that I think you can learn from.
Yeah, I'll check that out. Watch turkeys doing turkey stuff.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty good.
Tell us about the spitting and drumming.
Oh, this is cool. This is one we do have an example to play for you, but it's nowhere near the original. It's like when your grandpa tells you, like, yeah, you can listen to Jimi Hendrix, but unless you've seen him live, you ain't seen nothing. It's the same with this spitting and drum. You like basically our human equipment in 2023, we can't even like record it and play it back to you properly, which is crazy. But yeah, it's one of those things that you almost feel before
I would agree.
you see. It's like when you feel the bass, the kind of the hair stand up on the back of your neck, and sometimes you just hear the spitting part of it, which is the you'll just hear that, and then the bird gets a little closer, and you'll start feeling like
it's like air. Just
yeah, it's so hard to
it is.
explain until you're within basically like 100 yards of a drumming turkey, of a displaying turkey. You'll have no idea what we're talking about. But this is the lowest frequency sound that you can find in Illinois outdoors coming from a wild animal. So really cool, really a neat thing, and something you have to be super close to hear.
And like Curtis said, we do have a video. You may need to turn up your audio a little bit. Kind of fast forward to where it starts getting a little good. So you'll hear the spit and drum in a few seconds.
Yeah, the spit is much easier to hear.
Man, I could barely hear that.
Yeah, it's so quiet. And really, biologists don't even 100% know how they make it. Like, is it the feathers vibrating? Is it something internally? Not even 100% sure. It's crazy. Lowest frequency sound you can hear out there. And yeah,
You can hear that one a little bit. It's this.
still doesn't do it
No,
justice.
it does not.
When you'll feel it when you're out there in the woods. It's amazing.
But as he's sitting here strutting, he's doing it constantly.
And look at that bird's head. This is a good time to talk about ID. So we're talking about males only, in for the most part, unless it's a bearded hen. But look at how bright that head is. That's an excited bird. See that white crown, bright blues and reds. That's a great way to know you got a gobbler coming at you. A bearded Jake gobbler, something that's a legal bird.
And here comes a hen, and you can just instantly see. I mean, look at her head, just very drab. Not, I mean, no color, a little blue gray if you like squint hard
Yeah,
enough, but nothing like that.
yeah. Much more cryptically colored. Now, if she had a beard, she would be a legal bird
Hmm.
if you were so inclined. But yeah, looking at obviously it's displaying, so you know it's a male. But just look at the colors in the head, you know it's a male right off the bat.
Beautiful birds.
Look good on a piece of bread right here in my face,
Yeah.
eating a sandwich.
But I hope you can at least kind of hear those spits, and I hope you all get to experience what it sounds like to have a nice drum. It's
That's,
it's an
that's
experience.
one call we can't make for you. We can make these other calls, but the spit and drum, yeah, I can't do that one.
Well, time to talk turkey. So we've got a few different kind of types of calls we're going to discuss today. We're going to take it a little bit slow, but we're really just going to focus on some of the primary vocalizations. We're not going to go through, an entire, basically every vocalization we just talked about on each call type, but we'll kind of hit the highlights and go over how to use them, how we use them in the field. But I first want to start off with just kind of a quick overview of our favorite call types, not necessarily brands, models, but what do we personally take in the woods? For me, it's one diaphragm call. I'll usually have another one in my back pocket because I'll lose one somehow, and then a pot or slate, and that's about all I take.
Yeah, I never want to be without the diaphragm call because I use them more than probably anything else. But I bring a whole smorgasbord. Like I try to bring three or four of like different colors, and I don't have a specific brand I like or anything. I just whenever I see them, usually on sale, I just pick up a bunch of them because until you open them, these things last forever. Once you open them and introduce moisture, then there's a little bit more the shelf life starts ticking if you don't really dry them out. But um, I like to carry a bunch with me because I find some are raspy, some are high pitched, and I don't know if it's more for me or for the bird. But if I try calling with one and don't get a response, I switch to another. And every once in a while I do that, and then I feel like I get more of a response. So
Hmm.
I don't know if I sound better, to the turkey or what it is, but I do like to carry multiple diaphragm calls. I do always carry a slate call too, mostly because I got this custom call from a good friend of mine's father, and so I feel like it's a good luck charm even if I don't use it. But it's made out of a piece of Osage orange from Missouri where I grew up, so pretty
That
cool.
is cool.
And then of various locator calls, but I usually don't carry a box call, and mostly that's because it takes up room in my pack, and I'm 90% diaphragm calls.
I'm the same, and we'll get into when we start talking about the box call a little bit why we don't necessarily carry one. Great for starting out. When I first started, that's what I used. It's a little difficult to control, especially the volume. It's really just a consistent volume that's kind of hard to control. But we'll kind of dive right into
But also
diaphragm
really
calls.
hard to mess up.
It is
So that's
extremely hard to
it
mess up.
definitely has its place, and if
If you've got a kid in the blind, hand them one and
for sure, not to mention there's a lot of people who just can't use diaphragm
Mhm.
calls. Don't feel bad. Some people's mouth is not the right shape, and you just can't do it. So
And if you do, when I first started diaphragm calling, when I just bought one off the shelf, threw it in my mouth, instantly gag reflex. These can be trimmed. So this is basically just a kind of tape. And you can see if you look really close, there's a metal ring that comes around. And you can basically trim all the way up to that point. You want a nice kind of tight seal against the roof of your mouth. So if you do have you're struggling with a mouth call just due to a gag reflex, it may be worth looking into to kind of trimming it just a hair. A few calling tips before we kind of dive into to these specifics. Avoid overcalling. I think that's pretty standard across all hunting. We all like to call. Duck hunters like to call. Goose hunters like to call. Turkey hunters like to call. There's a time and a place to call, and that's what we'll spend quite a bit of time talking about as we kind of go through these vocalizations. But you don't want to overcall. And like that next bullet, there are times where it pays to just be completely silent.
yeah, read the bird. If you're calling and the bird's not paying no attention to you whatsoever, I've had it before where a group of toms are out in a big field. not paying attention to my calls whatsoever, but slowly moving my
Hmm.
way, just be quiet because that your calling can at that point only screw things up, but not bring,
For
it's not
sure.
working to bring them in.
Yeah, turkeys are very good at the pinpointing where a sound is coming from, and the more you call, the greater chance you are of giving them that information to really pinpoint exactly where that sound's coming from, and they'll pinpoint it pretty quick. With that, you want to tell us some more about diaphragm calls?
Yeah. So with diaphragm calls, this is the toughest one to use, probably for most people. You might throw it in your mouth and you might be just a natural, but for most people, this is the one with the steepest learning curve. So you do need to be starting to play with this now. But we mentioned it before. The really convenient thing about diaphragm calls, hands free. So do it when you're driving, do it when you're riding your bike, do it when you're taking a shower, whenever you have a free second, you can be practicing with your diaphragm call. And when first starting out, what I like to tell people is don't even think of this thing as a turkey call in the beginning. Just think of it as a music instrument. You don't know what it does. Figure out that call and your limitations. So make a whole bunch of sounds out of it. And ideally, if you're starting this early, call on it for a few days before you even think sounding like a turkey. Because the biggest issue that people have is they put this in their mouth and they immediately want to make chow, 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 and sound just like a hen turkey, and they get stuck in that exact sound. When really you just need to be learning how to make the call work. So
Like a
here's
kazoo.
yeah.
Hmm.
Just get a good idea for the different pitches, tones that you can make with the call, and then go back and try to call turkeys once your mouth knows how to make these sounds. And you're going to find it's a whole lot easier to start sounding like a turkey. Now, for me, to do the yelp, I say the word chalk. And for a sequence, I don't pronounce the K, so it's more like chomp, 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 and then I can draw that out if I want. And then to make a shorter staccato note like a putt or a cluck, then I will produce that K to give the note a hard end, and it sounds like this.
And pay attention to his lower jaw. I know when I first started turkey calling, I thought a lot of it was like in the cheeks, but a lot of it is just dropping that jaw down. And that's kind of what he hinted at when he used the word chaw. It automatically forces his bottom jaw to drop out.
Yep, exactly. And it gives me that freedom to make it different by whether I pronounce the K at the end or not. So I can draw it out and go chaw 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 like a yelp, really like a lonesome hen, or get at that fast abrupt end. And then to add in the purr, the only thing I do for that is roll my lips. So some people will do the purr internally. That works too. For me, it works better rolling my lips, and it sounds like this kind of all put together. And one other little tip, chapstick is really good to have with you because with dry lips, you lose your ability to make a lot of calls. So that's why I got a drink
Water.
handy.
Yep.
I'm always drinking, but also chapstick. If you're out there, slather that on because this is your instrument if you're using a diaphragm call, and I assume maybe people that play the trombone and saxophone and all that
Sure,
really well, maybe
sure.
they do the same thing, but little chapstick's going to give you sharper breaks to your notes.
And I will say one thing, just a little bit about kind of storing these. Curtis kind of showed when you purchase them, they usually come in these nice little plastic cases. Keep these. I promise it keeps the calls in good condition. The latex has a very tendency. I've actually got one here that I didn't properly maintain, and they're pretty much all fused together at this point. So this call is essentially worthless. So I know you have kind of a unique technique to kind of separate those and let them get good and dry after you use them.
Yeah, if you have one that you really like it loves you, you love it. It's this is like a beam of light comes from the ceiling and shines on this call. You want to keep it good forever. A little toothpick, just a little wooden toothpick. You just put it between all the reeds. So if it's a 2 reed, 3 reed, if it's a 3 reed, you'll need at least 2 toothpicks to gently poke in there. Don't disrupt your reeds. If you have to break off the little tips, you don't poke a hole. But that just allows airflow. So it creates an airspace so that a pocket of water doesn't sit in there and mildew or something bad like that. And then let them fully dry. Once it's fully dry, you can pull that toothpick out, put it back in your case, and storing it anywhere is fine. If you really want to increase the longevity, store it in your refrigerator once it's dry. But yeah, then one of these things will last maybe forever. I don't know.
Yeah. Again, they're like $3 normally when I purchase them, like Curtis said. Try to find them on sale and you can get pretty good deals. I mean, we had a Field and Stream store that just closed on us, so we unfortunately don't have that anymore. But regularly, you could find turkey diaphragm calls for $1.99 a piece. Sometimes you get a 3-pack for $10, and they all sound just fine. Anything else to add on to diaphragm or?
No, the obvious benefits are it's hands-free. So
actually, could you talk a little bit about why you were kind of cupping?
Oh, sure, yeah. So that's not really important. I do that more out of habit when I'm practicing. If I'm actually out there turkey hunting and the turkeys can see me, I'm not doing that at all because it's too much moving. But what that does is it does allow me to sound like multiple birds because I can a little bit throw the noise that way, throw the noise this way, sound like different birds talking to one another. So a cool thing to do when you're practicing, or if the bird is a long, long ways away. But once I'm actually set up, I'm not doing any of that. I'm, gun in the ready and using the diaphragm call to its full potential, which means hands free.
And even if, for some reason after we go through all these, you just decide the diaphragm is not for you, I still recommend picking one up and at least learning how to putt with it. Like we mentioned, that putt call, when it's time to take that shot and get that tom to stick his head up, there's not a better way to do it than with a diaphragm where you're already mounted, you're already on the target. All you need him to do is just lift his head up a little bit. And a nice hands-free diaphragm can just sing that putt just perfectly.
And it's real easy to remember because all you got to do is just say putt putt. Say what it is. It's the same thing. Like it's so sharp, making that P sound works really well. So putt putt or putt putt, anything like that. Anything. Doesn't have to sound perfect.
Nope.
It's enough so he changes his mind from showing off for the ladies to what in the heck's out there that's dangerous,
Awesome. Well, we'll move right on to the next call type, which is going to be arguably my favorite just because I really like the overall control of the Slate call, but I also like the versatility of it. And I do have an issue with a gag reflex, so I can only get 5 or 10 minutes of calling on a diaphragm before I need to take it out and switch to something else. So I usually run a nice Slate call. Now, you'll hear me use the term Slate call kind of interchangeably. These are technically what we call pot calls, and they do come in a variety of different surfaces. And we'll kind of talk a little bit about why one might be better than the other. I'm going to switch cameras here so you can get a good look at these. So we essentially have two different models here. We have one that's kind of what most people would consider your standard pot call. So this is in fact Slate. Now, if you saw what I just did, I touched it with my finger. I did that on purpose. And you can see that oil that's already formed on that call. Slate calls are notorious for that. They do not like to get wet, whether it's from just a moist environment, whether it's from precipitation and rain, or whether it's from just oils from your hands. That's where these really come into play. The crystal, and I think Curtis has another one that maybe he'll let me borrow to kind of showcase, but these are often glass, plastic, or a crystal, but these can work wet. So even in a wet condition, if this thing is pouring rain, if you use an acrylic striker, you can still produce a sound with it, even if it gets wet. A wooden striker on an acrylic won't produce as much sound even when it's wet, but if you were to try to use your standard slate call wet, it's not going to sound like anything. So one of the more important aspects of a pot call is conditioning the call. When you first get it, it's going to be a fairly smooth surface, and you need these friction lines that allow that sound to create. If you don't have any friction, you're not going to make any sound. So all calls will come with this nice little scotch pad or scratch pad, but what's important is the directionality that you condition this call. When I first started, I was like, oh, it's a circle. I'll just do it in a circle. Well, turns out that's not the best way, because we want to have perpendicular lines so that our striker is always consistently going over those little lines that you create in a consistent direction. And so when you're conditioning a call, you want to make sure you go all in one direction. And you can even see, hopefully you can see those little lines that are now formed on the surface of that call. And that allows you to then take your striker and make vocalizations with it. So that's kind of how you condition it. I always keep a few of these extra in my pack. They're, small, lightweight, weigh virtually nothing, but you'll end up losing a few, just inevitable. So we'll start off with kind of a basic yelp. A lot of it comes down to how you hold the striker. Don't hold it like a death grip. You don't want too much pressure to where you're really digging that call into the slate. It's a very soft kind of pattern, but I also want to mention on the back of the call, you can see these holes. Every one of them will have some type of holes, and this is where the sound comes from. So when you're holding that call, don't just put it, flat on your hand or down on your knee. You want to have some space for that sound to come out of these holes and be able to, carry a good distance. So for the yelp, I like to start with just kind of a basic 45-degree angle with my striker against the surface. And again, you can see I'm going perpendicular to those lines that I created with this scotch pad. So these are kind of going in this direction, and my striker will move in this direction. And for a basic yelp sequence, all I'm essentially doing is a very tight and low pressure oval. So it's just very soft, very subtle. And I'll go ahead and show the crystal just so you can hear a good distinction between the two sounds, because they do have a different sound quality for sure.
There's aluminum.
Ooh, fancy. I can't even get a sound with this strike. There we go. You got a better striker
here.
And that's another thing. Strikers come in a variety of different woods. They can come in acrylic. Sometimes you'll have some that are like tipped in a different surface, but you will start to find some that perform better with various call types. But you can see it's all about the amount of pressure you're putting. And so with the yelp, I'll kind of lay it flat here and just try to give a good visualization so you can see these basic oval shapes that I'm making. Again, it probably won't sound quite right since I've got it flat, but you'll be able to hear and see these basic oval shapes is all we're making. And again, I really like that 45-degree angle between the striker and the surface of that call, just a very tight oval, and gives you a nice yelp sequence. Now for the purr is quite simple, I would say, on a slate or a pot call. You're just putting a little bit more pressure on the yelp and kind of digging that stylus in and just slowly pulling it towards you. There are some individuals who like to push it away. I don't find I get a very good purr with that, but if I pull it towards me, and you can work it right into a nice yelp sequence. And so that's what it sounds like on the crystal. This is where I think the purr shines, is on a slate. Can't get a good angle. There we go. So it's just a very soft purr that you can work into a nice yelp sequence. Now the purr arguably is going to be, in my opinion, more effective on a diaphragm call, because again, I'm constantly using that when they're in close location, when I don't want a lot of hand movement. But what I really like to use a slate call for is, again, that yelp sequence, but also clucks. So clucks are quite simple on a slate call. Again, you're just going to use that same 45-degree angle, push a little bit of pressure, and pop it towards you. I'll kind of show it on this call because I think this will produce a better sound for us. So it's just a little bit of pressure, not too much, to get that nice cluck. And if I want to turn that into a cut, I'm going to put a little bit more downward pressure on the striker into the surface of the call, and I'm going to do it at a faster and more erratic pace. So here's a basic cluck into a cut. And then you can work that directly into a yelp sequence. And you'll hear occasional squeaks. I think a lot of people get freaked out with slate call and pot call because of that squeak. But again, every turkey sounds a little bit different. And you're going to hear those various squeaks from different vocalizations. Obviously, you don't want a ton of them, but if the occasional squeak happens, it's nothing to, totally freak out or expect your hunt to be over with. But just that basic, pop it down. Back into that nice oval for a yelp finish. Now, one thing I do want to mention, the whole time I'm using a slate call, I do not like to let my stylus leave the surface of that call while I'm calling, because you can hear that's how you get the pops, and that's also how you're going to get more squeaks. If you keep that striker always on that surface, you can get a lot different and a lot more consistent notes. And you'll also find, I don't know if Curtis, if you'll agree with this, but you'll start to almost find a sweet spot on your call as well as the striker. And once you kind of find that sweet spot, you'll start to really get the hang of it.
Yeah, that's the main reason I like to never take the striker away from the pot calls, because, yeah, you find that groove where you're in the sweet spot, everything sounds good. It's almost like a record player and the needle's in it.
Yeah.
But then once you take it off, you have to refine that, at least for me. And there's nothing like a pot call if you want to feel like an old school turkey hunter.
Agree.
And really fun. And this instrument can make every sound that a turkey can. So really a fun call to play with. Yeah, diaphragm call, super convenient. But as far as the cool call, this is probably the cool call.
I'd agree. You want to show your other crystal version there too? A little bit different than kind of the one I showed.
Yeah, just a little different. And so these, when you first get them, a lot of times they don't have a surface on them. You might rub on them and think it's broken because it doesn't make any sound because there's no friction. So you got to start from scratch with your Brillo pad and lay it down in just one side, but then it'll sound a little bit different. You can get really loud on these, so especially a rainy day or a windy day when it's hard to hear. Sometimes it's just if the wind's blowing the right direction, the bird might not be able to hear you. You might have to get really loud just to get that response, and these crystal calls are pretty good at that. That's pretty loud. That might even be too loud. Sorry about your ears.
But that's the real, I think, selling point of a Potter slate call for me is the versatility in terms of tones, in terms of calls, also in terms of volume. Like Curtis just showed you, very, very loud vocalization, but you can also get very soft all the way into loud. And so you just got this nice range of basically everything you need in one call.
Yeah, I like the aluminum one for quiet, especially when the birds are still in the tree and you're trying to be quiet. Just think really small little ovals and trying to be... They're like micro yells.
I like
really,
that.
really quiet. And for some reason on the aluminum, I can do that, and I can't do it as good on the crystal. The slate, pretty much everything works, but like Dan said, I mean, if you sneeze on that thing too hard, it's
Yeah.
toast for the whole
Yeah.
day. So
Have a backup.
Moisture's not good. Having a backup's good. The aluminum in the crystal still works with some moisture. Slate, no good.
And also, when you get your striker or get your call, it'll come with a striker. You will likely also need to rough up that striker a little bit. I'll normally just kind of take the Brillo pad and just kind of touch it up just a little bit. Again, just getting a little bit of surface area that you're getting some friction, because that's what it's all about. These are all friction calls, and they need that friction to work.
In the old days, people used to burn the end thinking that it would get harder. Really, that's counterproductive because you want the tiny vibrations of the wood, and as soon as you burn it, that wood loses any elasticity that it used to have. So burning it will still make a sound, but it's not the kind of deep, rich sound that you want. So leave it unburned, just rough it up.
Sure. And again, the really nice thing about Slate Call, well, really about all turkey calls, you don't have to spend that much money. You really don't. You can if you want to. If you want to get some of the high-end handmade stuff, you can. But you can also just get the very basics. This is a hunter specialty, and I've had this for probably a decade now, and it goes with me every turkey hunt. It works. Why switch it up? Well, I guess next we'll kind of move right into box calls. Your favorite, right?
Yeah, nothing wrong with box calls at all. It's just I don't carry them because I like the other two calls so much. But yeah, if I'm bringing somebody new that's questionable on their calling, the box call is the way to go because you can't really mess it up. Even if you mess it up, it still sounds
like a turkey. Yep.
Yeah, you could drop that thing out down the stairs and it'll probably sound like a turkey.
Yeah, just moving around, it still has a little bit of
sounds like a turkey.
Not even doing too much. But the nice thing about box calls is, like Curtis said, they're fairly easy to use. But what I really like about them is the volume that you get out of these. You're not gonna. It's hard to control the volume, I will say that, but you're going to get a lot of volume. So if it's a very windy day, I will normally have one of these in my car. I don't take it with me on every hunt. I've had a history of breaking them over time. I'll throw them in my pack, and I get to a point where I have to slam against the tree to get ready for a shot, and I end up smashing it. So I don't carry it with me all the time.
Then it's a puzzle.
Yeah. But really good calls, really useful. I'll switch cameras here to show you because we have two different models here. And one of the big issues when box calls kind of first came on the market, again, water. They don't like water. But now they've started to come out with some waterproof solutions to some extent. And so you can see here on this side, we have a waterproof one. Over here, we just have your kind of standard box call. Now, when you get a box call, just like the Slate, there is a little bit of conditioning that you need to do before it's kind of ready to really start singing. And they all usually come with this little piece of chalk, and all you're doing is just really rubbing it on the underside of this paddle, as well as these two lips where that paddle is going to rub against when you start to make vocalizations. The nice thing about this waterproof one is it's already got this kind of basic, I don't even know what it is. I'm not even going to anticipate or try to make it up, but some kind of coating on both the lip as well as on the paddle that allows this to still produce sound even when wet. And I have found I like this one. It almost sounds better when it does get wet than it does when it's dry. So interesting calls, but very easy to use. There's kind of two schools of thought when using box calls. Some people will control the paddle. Other people will hold the paddle still and kind of move the sound chamber around. Really doesn't matter, whatever kind of floats your boat. But I'll just do a kind of a basic yelp sequence, and all I'm doing is putting slight pressure between the edge of this paddle. You can see it's kind of rounded here. Turn it to see if you can see there's a little bit of roundedness to that paddle. You can see it's kind of convex. So I'm going to put that right on the edge and just kind of pull it down. You can see it produces kind of a fairly consistent yelp. I'll go ahead and kind of do it on the waterproof version so you can hear what that sounds like. So it does have a little bit of different tone to it. Higher pitched. And like I mentioned, I think this one does sound a little bit better when it gets wet. It doesn't have as high of a pitch. It gets a little bit more rasp to it. But that's kind of your basic yelp sequence. So all we're doing is holding the sound chamber, taking the paddle, and just slowly running that paddle along the edge of that sound chamber. Now you can do a lot of different vocalizations with this. You can purr, which again is basically the same concept, except you're putting a little bit more downward pressure from the paddle into the edge of that sound chamber. So instead of just very slightly rubbing it like the yelp, you're going to put a little bit more pressure in it and kind of let it almost stick and just kind of. And you can get a half decent sounding purr out of it that you can run right into a yelp sequence. Now, one thing a lot of people do when they carry box calls, and I highly recommend if you're going to be running a box call, get some kind of silencer system, whether it's a rubber band or a hair tie, just to keep this paddle down against that sound chamber, because as this is in your pack, it will be moving around making some squeaky sounds. So that just kind of holds everything nice and tight, so as you're moving around, you're not getting too much additional noise. Now if you want to take the next step and do some various different clucks or putts, one of my favorite techniques, you can certainly do it with just your single paddle and try to putt it. I find that to be a little difficult, so I like to hold it like this with the paddle kind of halfway open and put my thumb right on that point where the paddle is touching the edge of that sound chamber. And I'm putting quite a bit of downward pressure on that. And all I'm going to do is just kind of slap this paddle. And you're getting quite a decent little cluck, cut, purr, however you decide to use that note. That was pretty bad. But you get a nice little cut out of it. So it can be quite good for that, but primarily you're going to use this for nice yelp sequences. When I'm really running these days is if it's a super windy day, I might choose to run one of these box calls just to try to get a little bit more volume out into the void. If I'm just can't find a tom or whatever, I'm just trying to get one to react to me so I can start to make a strategy and make a play on them. It can be quite good to just really crank out some volume into the woods there.
If you like woodworking, you can make your own box calls. There's no tricky geometry here. It's a paddle that's rounded on both edges and a resonating chamber that you can make. So you just make these and chalk it up and see what it sounds like. But this is one you can make yourself for sure. I definitely like the richness that
it's very rich
in the yelp that you maybe don't get with the Slate and the Diaphragm. But luckily, turkeys are not quite so picky when it comes to what calls. So I'll take the two others because I like them better, but it does sound nice.
Yep, and nothing wrong with them. And again, it's a great starting point. Absolutely great starting point. And if you want to take it the next step, or you want to even get a little more simple, I recommend if you're taking a youth out, or even if they're just going to sit in the blind with you and just kind of hang out, give them one of these. These are standard push-pull type calls. You're not going to really mess up anything. In my opinion, they don't necessarily sound the greatest, but they do certainly have their place. So I'll kind of give a quick little yelp sequence with this. And so you can see the tone is obviously a little deeper. It's not as, like you kind of described with the box call, it's not as rich. It's a little more muddied. But you can even do some purring. Now, what I saw when I first started getting into turkey hunting was there was a big push for hands-free calling, especially for those who, for whatever reason, couldn't figure out a diaphragm, didn't like a diaphragm. And so a lot of people, when these first came on the market, were mounting them on the underside of their shotguns and running a little bit of string to this post. So they could sit back here with their shotgun mounted, have this on the bottom of the barrel, and be pulling a little string and still be able to get a little vocalization out that way. I don't personally use one. I don't know if you ever have or not, but
No, I've got a pair of just they're specially made for making fighting purrs. So
ooh,
they just make the purrs and it's to make really raspy purrs. Honestly, I don't know if I've ever really used it. It's
yeah,
one of those novelty calls, I guess, that like a snort wheeze, maybe it's got a specific utilization, but
sure.
I haven't used it.
All right, you want to tell us a little bit about locator calls?
Yeah, so locator calls, basically a turkey, a gobbler is going to do what they call shot gobble. So even if it's not something that that bird is interested in, it could be thunder, it could even be your car door slamming, that could elicit what's called a shot gobble. And so locator calls are an attempt to get them to shot gobble using a sound that's not going to scare them. So hopefully we don't want to just go out there and slam our door because yeah, you might get a shot gobble, but you might also scare a bird. So let's use a sound that they're used to. If it's before the sun's up, then an owl, great choice. Natural sound, they're calling. It's a sound that travels a long ways. Also, one that maybe you can't really mess up because if a turkey is pretty open with the turkey calls it'll listen to, just how open it is if you make an owl call. You can sound pretty bad, and I'm pretty sure the turkey will still be like, oh, that's an owl. I guess I'll gobble at it. Um, Once the sun comes up, a lot of people are going to switch to something like a crow, really easy to call. But don't look past other calls that you got in your house. Maybe you got a goose call, a duck call. Those work too, and those are realistic night or daylight. So if you're good with those, don't bring them out. You'll also see peacock calls,
Hmm.
blue jay calls, anything like that. But I'll show you kind of how to do some of these. But again, sounding really good is especially not important when it comes to locator calls. Just sound decent and sound loud enough that the turkey can hear you. So the two different ways that you might be using these. One is when we do what's called putting the gobbler to bed. So if you go out there the night before to scout, try to figure out what roost the birds are using. You're going to be listening for this bird to fly up and gobble. Maybe you're going to try to get that to happen with a shot gobble. Or the other way is you're there in the morning, you're not sure where the birds are, it's before the sun's up, and you're trying to get them to gobble. So I actually don't have an owl call with me. Some people can do it pretty good with their mouth, but if you've heard a barred owl call, the sound they make is who cooks for you, who cooks for you all. So they have these nice little tubes you can do that in, or you can do it with your mouth and just like
Oh, pretty good.
doesn't have to sound great.
It would do it.
Boom, it can get them to gobble. Now your crow calls,
Which
got
that's what I prefer. I just find
various
crows are
different ones
everywhere.
everywhere, and especially once the sun comes up, maybe they're more realistic than an owl. And because it's a sharper call, it probably travels through the wind and conditions a little bit better than an owl call, a little lower frequency, but just a very
That's
simple,
it.
you can't mess it up, and turkey hears it and he gobbles. Same way with a goose flute. Bring out your goose flute. Gobble. And then as another is an actual gobble call. So this is one I don't recommend using because remember, everybody's out there hunting gobblers. So you're just as likely to call in a hunter as you are a bird with this. But if you're on public land or whatever the reason you want to use a gobble call, this can also get them to gobble.
And you still can use that on public land. Just be cautious.
Yeah, no laws against it. The only reason we recommend not is you don't want to call another hunter to your
Because
location.
it will happen, guaranteed.
For sure, yeah. Just think other people are hunting gobblers. So if you're making a gobble call, you've got hunters walking your direction. Now you've got a gobbler decoy out in front of you. Probably just not the best case scenario on public land, but it will get them to gobble. All these things will. And once you find their position, now you've used a call in most of these things that's not going to make them come at you. It just gives up their position. So boom, you pull up the map on your phone and develop a plan. Then you start calling with calls that may bring the bird to them after you've developed your plan. And that's so you can catch the turkey off guard, not the other way around.
I like it. And we did have one comment that I kind of wanted to bring up before we get too far away from the push pull. Pete told us that he was able to get a good amount of chalk on his post down. You can see how this call functions, just a little spring that causes this piece of wood to rub on that little peg that's down in there. You do want to chalk that up, and he said he was able to chalk his up enough that it actually sounds a lot more like a box call than it does kind of a standard push pull where it's got that kind of deep sound to it. So there's certainly some tuning you can do with most of these calls.
And some are better than others.
This one's a fairly cheap. I think it just
may need to
broke on me.
adjust that tensioner in there too. You can put slightly more bend on that wire, so it's putting less pressure between the two striking plates. But yeah, we'll tune that.
All right. So when would you use your locator calls? Ideally, we're trying to put birds to rest so that we can find where they're going to be at in the morning.
Yeah, so either at night when you're putting them to bed or bright and early in the morning. As soon as you get out there, you can also use them to find your location. But then also, let's go ahead and fast forward. Plan A didn't work out. You set up on some birds, they went the way you weren't talking, but you've still got the whole morning off to hunt. So you don't just want to go back home and go to bed. This is another time you can pull out the locator calls and just try to find a bird and develop a plan. They may or may not. Some people will just use loud yelps as locator call. That's fine too. Just be aware if you use any kind of call that can bring the bird to you, he's going to be developing a plan at the same time as you. So you don't get that same drop that you get if you use a locator call that doesn't bring them to you. So I like using a locator call that has no attraction to the bird whatsoever.
I agree.
And that gives me that head start, because hey, I'll take every advantage I can get. Turkey hunting's not easy.
It is not.
It's tough out there. So I'll take the advantage I can get.
And I want to reiterate a point that you just kind of made. The hunting the roost is very difficult. It takes being in the right place at the right time. It takes studying your approach to make sure you can get there undisturbed. The vast majority of my turkey hunting success is from about 10 to noon. I think a lot of that is the bird's up on the roost. He flies down. He already knows where those hens are. He chose his roost judging by that usually. And so he's going to go off and do whatever he wants to do, go breed, go feed with those hens. Later in the morning, he'll start venturing out a little bit more. And that's when I really start to use these locator calls. Again, I don't do a ton of getting right up on the roost, just not kind of my hunting style. So I like to be a little bit more kind of cautious that first little bit in the morning. But from 10 to noon, I'm doing a lot of locator calling, trying to find where that gobbler is that's now just kind of venturing, usually on his own at that point, and try to make a good play.
Yeah, one thing got to say about the late morning toms that answer you, most of the time those birds want to play ball.
Yes.
Like every turkey in the tree is going to talk to you. So when you're calling to turkeys,
and it's going to make you feel good.
Yeah, they're going to be excited. They're going to be answering you. You are going to think that you are the object of desire of that turkey, and your little heart's going to break when it lands down and doesn't give you.
And you never see it again.
Yeah, it's gone. But when you get a bird to answer you at 10 o'clock, there's a very good chance. I mean, I venture to say like 80% chance that you can call that bird in. Now, whether or not you get a shot is going to be up to you. But if you get a bird to answer your yelps after 10, it's game on. You better be ready to shoot, because that bird is lonely and you sound like companionship that it wants. So be ready.
But if you do happen to really pinpoint a nice roost the night before and you want to make a play on it, what I like to do is really try to stay back from that roost, especially the evening I'm trying to locate. And I like to try to watch those birds visually go up to the roost. Again, the vast majority of the time you can't necessarily do that, but if you can, that's going to give you a ton of information, because typically turkeys are going to follow the same path that they took to get up into the tree to get down. That's just kind of standard operating procedure from them. If they fly up from a certain part of the field, chances are they're probably going to go down in that same spot of the field. So being able to visually watch how they get up to the roost, if you're trying to make a roost set first thing in the morning, can be extremely productive.
And sometimes you can hear that and put it together, which
Yeah.
is a good reason to bring the locator calls. Because if you can get them to gobble 2 or 3 times on their walk, then maybe just by hearing it, you can put it together which way they came
Hmm.
in, and then you have a good idea which way they might come out.
Had a good question come in. How many yards do you suggest to hang back of a roosted tom in the morning before they fly down? That's a good question. A lot of it really depends. I hate saying this, but a lot of it depends on the landscape. If it's an area where I feel like I could get right on top of them without seeing them, I may try. But typically, I'm not even within 100 yards. I really like to just let the roost do its own thing, let them fly down naturally. Because again, like Curtis said, they're all going to be talking up there. It's very difficult to pinpoint a specific bird, and especially on public land where these birds have usually been. I never draw the first or second season anyway, so usually these birds have been called at. They've seen hunters, they've seen decoys. They're just a little bit more timid. So I try to play as cautious as I can. I know, I have 4 or 5 days to hunt. That's it. And so I try to stack the odds in my favor by not being too aggressive right off the bat. So I may go out and try to locate a roost, but I usually don't even set up on that roost. I may, get within 250 yards or so of it in the morning and just kind of listen and see where that time goes off. But that again, and every single person you ask is going to have a different answer. So I'll kind of let you dive into your
I
thoughts.
agree. It's an aggressive play, so it's more of a later in your season kind of thing. If you have 4 days to hunt, you're not doing that on day 1 and 2. Maybe that's day 3 and 4, and it's basically just because, like you said, there's so many things that can go wrong.
Hmm.
The turkey can definitely spot you even before the sun is up. Once the sun starts coming up, forget it. You're not getting away with any movement, anything like that. Also, it's a loud time of year.
It
In the
is,
morning, a lot
yes.
of times it's calm, sound travels. You're walking on crunchy leaves. It's really hard. So it's an aggressive play. Once you bust the toms out from the roost, it's probably game over for that particular bird in that area for you. So if you mess it up on day 1, that's not good. That's why I say save it. It's a more aggressive strategy that maybe you go to later in the year. But if you do it, get out there early. I'm
Very
talking
early.
if you can be out there 2 hours, solid 2.5 before shooting time, so that you can walk like an animal, which means not fast,
And not
move
consistent.
slow. Yeah, walk for a little bit and stop. Walk for a little bit and stop. If you have enough time to do that, then sure, you can slowly get to where you might be, where you can see the bird in the roost. And when it flies down, maybe it's pretty close to being in range. That's possible. Just remember, aggressive tactic. And if you screw it up, yeah, it might be game over for that
Yeah.
particular bird.
And I think a lot of it for me also comes down to why I really enjoy turkey hunting. Hunting a roost is very similar to a deer hunt. You're just kind of sitting there waiting for the morning to happen and hope that, early morning pattern that you picked up on works. What I really, really love about turkey hunting is this game of chess that you're playing between you and that bird. You're trying to figure out where he is. Now you're trying to cut him off to try. It's just this game of cat and mouse that I find really appealing, and I like that active approach to turkey hunting. So I probably, yeah, I just don't do a lot of roost hunting. I think for that fact, as well as, again, it's aggressive. It's really easy to blow out an area, especially on public land, as these birds are already somewhat pressured. They've already been called at. They've seen hunters. They've seen everything at this point. So hope that answers your question. But what I would say about kind of talking, about the roost a little bit, I never want to be the first turkey calling in the woods. And you may have already mentioned this and I kind of glossed over, but if I'm near a roost, I will never be the first thing to start calling. I want them to wake up naturally, let them start calling. And especially if they're going to know you're on the ground. And if you start calling an hour before sunrise, they know that's a little weird. There shouldn't already be a bird on the ground. I mean, things happen, but usually they're not going to be calling from the ground at that time. So I don't do a ton of calling while they're up in the tree, especially loud calling, before they start talking. Once they start waking up and they start talking, sure, go ahead and have fun with them. You're going to, like Curtis said, every turkey's going to start gobbling back at you, and it'll make you feel like the best turkey caller in the world. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I especially like to just repeat everything that they're saying. Anything that the hen says, just try to repeat it, try to match it, but maybe a little bit harder.
Hmm.
And if nothing else, maybe you make those hens so angry that they come over to you, and maybe the gobbler comes too. Just remember, you got to fool all their eyes. So be in your shooting position before you think you need to, because we mentioned it before, but you're not getting away. Even this little
They're
movement,
gonna pick it.
you're probably not getting away with that. So be ready.
So this is just kind of a quick illustration of, I just wanted to really kind of paint a picture here of if I was going out to like roost this site. I kind of put a fake roost here just to kind of give some illustration. But what I like to do is really triangulate my locator calling without trying to get too interior in the property or interior in the hunting site. And so an area like this where I have multiple parking locations kind of on either side of a big area, that can really help you triangulate where that bird is without ever having to get anywhere near it that evening. So this is my style of locator call. If I'm going to go out the night before, I just want to get a decent triangulated area that, oh, there's a roost in that chunk of timber somewhere. For me, that's really all I care about. There are some people that it's in that tree on that limb, and they're going to try to be within 20 feet or 20 yards of it that next morning. Just not my style. Again, it's very aggressive. It can be a lot of fun, I'm sure, if it works, and it looks productive for some people, but just not necessarily the way I like to do it.
And while you mentioned roost, just a little science to put to this. There was a turkey study, I can't remember where it was out of, but about 50% of the roost trees chosen are white oaks. So they will roost in a lot of different types of trees, but the one that comes up most often, just over 50% of the time, is a white oak. So
That's interesting. Huh.
yeah, you think about a white oak, they just got those big branches that a lot of times they'll go straight out, and give a really good platform for a
Sure.
bird to stand, a bird the size of a turkey. So, yeah, for some reason they love the white oaks.
Hmm. So again, just to kind of reiterate, if you're going to set up near the roost, I personally would not get any closer than 100 yards. I think that's probably about as close as you can usually get away with, unless you really take your time and you really study that area before you try to sneak in there. And again, we've talked a little bit about decoy placement in the past, but I just kind of want to reiterate that again. I personally like to start with a very non-aggressive, just standard feeding. So I may have a few hens just set up, 15 or 20 yards away. But one of the more important aspects I really want to highlight is place the decoys beyond your position. One thing that happens a lot with turkey hunting is he will hang up about 50 yards or so past your decoys to where he's just at a point. I'm just going to sit here. I'm going to sit here. I'm going to strut. I'm going to gobble. And I'm going to try to get those ladies to come to me, like is what normally happens, right? But we're trying to reverse that process. And so I like to put my decoys past my location for multiple reasons. Obviously, one, like we just kind of mentioned about, if he hangs up, 50 yards behind these decoys, well, heck, now he's still probably in my effective range. But what I really like to use it for is his eye is now over here, and he's going to be looking over there the whole time, which means I can be over here and get away with a little bit more movement potentially. And so I really like to put those decoys beyond my location where I expect him to walk past me to get to those decoys again. So if he hangs up, he's still within my effective range, but also just to keep his attention in that direction and not looking where I'm at. So if you're hunting near the roost, again, even if you're not necessarily hunting a roost, you're just hunting near the roost, I don't like to be the first bird to call. I like to let them start naturally, and I also like to start very soft. I know Curtis talked about this quite a bit with his diaphragm call. Maybe he'll give us a little sequence here of what he does.
Yeah, and one way just to really make sure I'm soft is cover your mouth. Like, because remember, now it's dark, you can get away with just a little bit more movement. So, and I'll be wearing a glove a lot of times too, and I'll call into that glove, and that way I can make sure that it's really, really quiet.
And that's really all it takes in the morning.
Yeah, just really quiet. Sound really travels if it's not windy or anything. And then if they keep answering you, just keep doing what they're doing. And if that gobbler's really getting excited, then hopefully what you're doing is working.
Mm-hmm.
And don't get too excited because, like we mentioned before, we've definitely all been there where everything's going great, everybody's excited,
Yeah,
you
five
fly
gobblers,
down,
all yeah.
and then an hour later you're still sitting there ready to shoot, and the woods is quiet. You have no idea what happened. They just went into another dimension, and who knows where they are for all you know. But it can also happen the other way too, where you think nothing's happening, you're out there and you don't think there's a turkey in the woods, and then all of a sudden they're right out in front of you.
Or all of a
So
sudden you hear that.
yeah, or you see one running away that you didn't spot.
That happens quite a bit too, yeah. But that actually does bring up a really good point that not always, I mean, obviously we're trying to hear that gobble react to our calls. That lets us know that he's engaged. It lets us know we're communicating with him. Not every Tom is going to behave that way. I have found, especially Jake's, they really like to do this like
Be
sneak
quiet.
assassin nonsense where you're just going to be sitting there and you may have a Tom that you're talking to, 80 yards away and you're expecting him, and then all of a sudden here comes a Jake 5 yards from you and just staring right at you. So just because you don't hear a gobble does not mean they're not responding. It does not mean that they're not hearing or listening to you.
Yeah, the Jakes are sneak attackers for
They
sure.
are.
Because you think the big gobblers, they're displaying, they're trying to get the hen to choose them to come to them. A Jake's only hope is to sneak attack,
Mm-hmm.
to basically come in and be, oh, you're a receptive hen. Well, guess what? I'm a gobbler
Yep, we're
too.
doing it. Yep.
Like this is happening, and so yeah, a lot of times the Jakes will just show up. You never knew they were there. If you really pay attention with your ears, you can tell the difference between a Jake gobble and a mature bird gobble. It almost sounds like Jakes are learning how to gobble,
Yeah.
and so they don't quite have it down yet. And so we don't have a good example to play for you. But if you hear a gobble and you're, oh, that one doesn't quite sound right, a lot of times that's a Jake.
And I've even noticed you'll hear Jake start to gobble like way earlier in the season than Tom's. I've heard Jake's gobble when I was out, late season deer hunting in January or out even shed hunting in February. I think they're just immature. They don't really know what's happening yet, and they're trying to develop that vocal system. But like Curtis said, they definitely sound different.
If you do get the Jake, definitely take the good thing about it is it's a tender bird.
Yeah,
And
delicious.
so that's an excellent one. If you're gonna inject one with some orange juice and deep fry it in peanut oil, you want a Jake for that, not your big old, 20+ pound Tom. He might be a little tough for that, but you get the Jake, and you're gonna please the neighborhood if you do
Mhm.
that and have a little cookout with your neighbors. You're gonna be a popular person in your neck of the woods. I promise you that.
I'm a Jake Slayer. I do not discriminate. But a few other kind of last minute tips as we kind of wrap up here. One thing I do want to mention that I didn't get a chance to, I want to go back to a slide that'll kind of help illustrate it a little bit more, is this whole concept of toms hanging up. When I first started turkey hunting, that was the most frustrating thing to me. You have this tom that you're just communicating with sometimes for an hour, and he's just out there just strutting, walking back and forth, pacing in about a 10 or 15 foot area, just back and forth for an hour. And it can be very difficult to convince that tom to take that next step. Again, your decoy placement can help. Also, your calling. That's when I'm going to start trying to throw my vocal. Again, you may have to, in this case, you're getting a little aggressive because that tom's, you're just trying something, right? And so I may try to throw my vocalization to sound a little bit like it's coming from a different area just to see if that can kind of get a little bit more engagement or interest. But another thing that's very common in the spring is henned up toms. So that means that tom flies off the roost and he's already got 5 or 6 hens in his harem. It is darn near impossible to convince that tom to leave a group of live hens that he's roosted, that he flew down with, that he's been feeding with and been chatting with, to come over to look at your plastic ones. There are a few different strategies you want to try, and one Curtis kind of mentioned when he was talking about the roost is mimicking. If there is what we call a boss hen or a dominant hen in that group that's with that tom, if you can irritate and basically piss her off, she is going to come to your location to try to fight. What's going to happen then? That's going to bring along the tom. And so not always are we focused on just trying to call to the toms. Be thinking a little bit that in some instances it may be advantageous to focus your efforts on those hens. In any case, if you get in that situation where it's a henned up tom and that hen is just, she's going to be sitting there yelping or clucking or cutting, interrupt her. Mimic her vocalizations, interrupt her, be louder than her, and she will eventually get agitated enough to the point that she may come over and try to start a fight with you, in which case that's going to bring that tom directly in your location.
Just remember, don't shoot the hens
Just
unless
don't.
it's
Yep.
self-defense, and you're gonna have a hard time convincing the game warden of that one.
Unless it's got a nice beard on it. So a few other kind of calling tips as we just kind of wrap up. Again, you want to make sure you have all these different conditioners for each of your call, whether you're using a pot or a slate. You want to have your scratch pad. If you're using one of the friction calls like a box or a push pull, you want to make sure you have your chalk handy. If you're using a diaphragm call, bottle of water and chapstick goes a long way. But don't overcall. I think that's one of the biggest things I struggled with early on was overcalling. And a lot of it just comes down to, unfortunately, experience, but also watching how individual birds are reacting to your vocalizations. Turkey hunting is so much of an art than it is a science. And you could sit there and have, the best sounding yelp sequence, and you're like, why is that tom not coming in? And then all of a sudden you may hit a squeak note, or you may do a yelp that sounds a little bit funky, and now all of a sudden he's engaged and he's interested again. So it's kind of this little trial game of cat and mouse that's a lot of fun. You're communicating with an animal, and don't be afraid to try new things. Don't be afraid to try different vocalizations that you've never even used. If you're in a situation where that tom's hung up, it's worth a shot. But I want to emphasize again, learn the body language of these birds. And there are some very good YouTube videos. We kind of mentioned one of the channels earlier, Claycomb Outdoors, just a lot of really good high quality footage of just turkeys doing their natural thing. And I think any hunter who starts to study the individual behavior of these birds is going to have a leg up over most people, because you'll start to really put a lot of these pieces together. So definitely check those out.
That bird's got a nice fan on it there. It's a good point to bring out. You can kind of tell the age of a bird by the fan. If it's got a nice, beautiful fan that's got an entire margin like that, and what I mean is a perfect semicircle, so a perfect half circle, that's an adult bird. The younger birds have a different molt pattern, where the middle feathers will be a different length than the side feathers, because they molt at different times. So if you see a mismatched fan, you can be pretty sure that's a Jake or a younger bird. And if you see that real nice fan like the one in front of Adam there, then that's a older, mature bird there. So probably not frying that one. That might be more of the turkey and gravy on mash. But I'm gonna have to stop talking about food. I'm getting hungry actually. So never mind. I retract my last statement.
And one kind of last thing we want to plug here as we wrap up is the National Wild Turkey Federation. Fantastic organization, whether you're just looking to meet like-minded hunters, whether you're looking for other outreach efforts, you're wanting to go to banquets, you're wanting to help fundraise, you're wanting to do habitat work, you're looking for a mentor, you're looking for a youth hunt. Great organization to check out. And what I really like about NWTF is once you sign up for membership, which I believe is $35 a year, or at least around there, that's what it was last year, you get access to their newsletter, and they're basically a magazine. It's called Turkey Country, and I believe they have 6 issues that come out each year. So as a member, you'll get those 6 editions, and they have some of the best written content on turkey behavior, turkey ecology, turkey calling that I've ever read. So if turkey hunting is something that you really want to pursue and you're not an NWTF member, I highly recommend looking into that. Oftentimes when you sign up, you usually get a special gift of some kind too, whether it's a knife or a hat, or sometimes a gift card or something like that. So highly recommend checking them out. They're in the midst of their big banquet season. I'm on the local committee here in Champaign County. We just had our banquet in January, so I know there's a lot of chapters that are getting their banquets on the docket for this spring and summer. So definitely look out for those. A lot of fun, a lot of good people to meet, and you'll probably walk away with something pretty cool. Anything to add as we kind of wrap up?
Yeah, just like we mentioned before, turkey hunting's a lot of fun. If you like deer hunting, we think you're gonna love turkey hunting. If you like any kind of hunting, turkey hunting.
If you like being outside,
yeah, because it's a whole different thing. Hearing the sounds of the mating behavior in the spring is awesome. Not to mention all the stuff that happens beyond turkeys. You're also getting to be in the woods in the spring breeding season for all birds. So all that's happening all around you.
The
It's
deer fawns will
morel.
be out.
You might find deer fawns. Remember to leave them there. Mama's
Mm-hmm.
around, so don't pick them up thinking they're orphaned. But it's also morel mushroom season, so you can go out there and find some morel mushrooms if you're lucky. A lot of fun reasons to be in the woods in spring, and yeah, turkey season's a great excuse to get out there, but it may not be the only thing you bring home that
Mm-hmm.
day. Maybe you get a big old pouch full of mushrooms. Maybe you find a couple sheds.
You may.
You never know.
And one thing you may also bring home is ticks. So we should kind of at least mention that just a little bit, as ticks are becoming more and more of an issue. And I think that's going to continue as you know, we move forward in time. But there are some really good products that can really save you when you're out there. So the one I recommend is permethrin. It's a chemical treatment that you apply to your clothes. This is not a skin treatment. Do not apply it to your skin. Highly toxic. Follow the label instructions on the bottle. It tells you exactly how to treat your clothes, where to do it, when to do it, how to do it. But essentially, it's a treatment that you apply to your clothes, and it lasts upwards of 5 to 6 washes. So for spring turkey season, I'll treat all my hunting stuff once, and that's it. That's all I have to do. And
that lasts a lifetime for me, because I don't usually wash my hunting clothes. So
got
I'm
a little
thinking,
stank
yeah,
to
that's
it.
gonna last
Yeah,
forever.
that's another great part of turkey hunting, is you don't have to worry about scent. If you want to sit out there with a cup of coffee and stank the place up, go right ahead. But permethrin is a great product. If you have cats in your house, be extra cautious with the label instructions, because it can be toxic to some felines. So just keep that in mind. But it's a very good preventative measure that essentially creates almost like a barrier between you and the ticks. As they start to crawl up on your permethrin treated clothes, they'll essentially just almost do this like free fall, where they start to get a little confused, and they'll just kind of tip backwards until they just fall right off. So highly recommend permethrin, as well as I'm a little goofy, but I will tuck my pant legs into socks, especially for spring turkey season, because I'm normally sitting on the ground in some kind of vegetation, trying to use it, you know, as some type of cover. So I go to the extreme to you know, make sure all my cuffs are nice and tight. I'll even occasionally put some duct tape around my wrist just to make sure everything's sealed, shirt tucked in with a belt, and my pants will be, you know, tucked into my boots or into my socks, just for as much protection as I can.
Hey, make that airtight seal all over the place. Got to be careful. You could
Mm-hmm.
pass some gas while you're
Start
out
floating
there.
away like a
Yeah,
balloon.
yeah, yeah. I know that's not a legal hunting method. You're not allowed to hunt from a hot air balloon, I'm pretty sure.
Be a pretty
So,
good way to find some roosts, though.
yeah, you get a bird's eye if you're ever stuck in a ravine. That could
Yeah.
be a tactic.
Well, anything to add?
I don't think so.
Awesome.
Be safe, have fun, be still, and you're probably going to screw it up a time or two, but you're still going to have fun. So get out in the woods, learn something from the turkeys, and if you are lucky enough to get a turkey, you're going to have some good food. It's a white
Great
meat.
food.
It's something you're used to. Anything you normally cook with chicken, you can do with turkey. They can be tough if you do get an older bird, but cook them low and slow, and it's going to be good. You get that big old bird that's who knows how old, crock pot that thing, making something like carnitas in Hank Shaw's book.
Yes.
I forget exactly what it's called, but he uses the legs and makes some carnitas out of turkey legs. It's delicious. It's awesome. Another
ready.
big favorite of mine is just making some simple gravy. You know, cook it low and slow into a gravy, add some onions, some mushrooms in there, and then just put a big old scoop on your mashed
Oh,
potatoes, and it's excellent. It's better the more days you go. So first day it's good, second day it's better, third day it's even the best. So
Nice.
a lot of things to do with turkey, a lot of reasons to be in the woods.
And even, you know, the animal itself, you know, you can make, we should have brought one with us. I have one at home,
the
but a wing bone,
call,
you can
yeah.
actually make a turkey call from some bones out of the turkey. The spurs make awesome decorations. The tail feathers make just gorgeous wall art if you want to get that nice, you know, fan display. Or I even take a lot of the breast feathers for fly tying and crappie jig making. So there's a lot of different uses outside of just the meat on a turkey. That a lot of cool stuff.
For sure.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us tonight. Again, we apologize for the Zoom issues we were having up front, but we appreciate you guys being patient and coming to join us. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, email, give us a phone call or a text, send us a carrier pigeon, whatever's best for you. We're happy to help. We're here to help. So good luck out there and stay
Do we
safe.
have to return the pigeon, or do we get to eat it?
I think we get to eat it. That should be part of the
Pigeon
deal.
pie.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
We can do a whole episode just on that. But remember, Illinois Learn to Hunt. We're your turkey hunting friend. If you don't have a mentor that you can bounce questions off of, look us up. Like Dan said, on Facebook. Email us. No question is dumb. We're not going to make fun of you. Talk to us. We can also hook you up with your local CPO. You can ask them questions. But we wanna be a team, and together we got a better shot at being successful turkey hunting than we all do alone. So
Love it.
we're your buddies here. Look us up and let us know your successes too.
Love pictures,
Oh, yeah.
love stories.
For sure.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.